All right, welcome everybody to Artful Tuesdays. I'm joined by Ciccolella of Austin Shakespeare and Jeff Britting of the Ayn Rand Institute archives. And we are here to discuss Ayn Rand's first literary sale, Red Pawn. This can be found in the Early Ayn Rand. And if you have the book, you want holding it up. I don't know if you, but like, so we're really we're doing a series. Yeah, we got it. Yeah. Oh yeah. There. Yeah. It's coming in and out of there. And we're doing a series on this early Ayn Rand. We really recommend you buy this. If you like Ayn Rand's writing, if you enjoy her storytelling, you could really get more of her. And this is where you can get it in the often unpublished early Ayn Rand. Now, and today what we're going to do is we're going to talk briefly about Red Pawn, the script, the background of it. Jeff Britting from the ARI archives is going to drop a bomb on us about this. And then we're going to get into the story just a little bit, but we really want you to read the story so that in, I think about a month, we're going to do part 2 of Red Pawn, where we'll really dive into the story more. And we are hoping for your questions about the screenplay and such. Okay. So before we get into the bomb that Jeff is going to drop, and I do think it's pretty amazing what he's got for us today. So thank you, all of you who are joining us live. Well, let's talk a little bit about what the story is. Let's assume somebody hasn't read it. So what is Red Pawn about, essentially? Like the background of it.
Well, it's set on Strasnoy Island, which is where prisoners are kept. And you have a very mean commandant. And this, that kind of format, it was old movies were done in this way. And it wasn't that unusual. What was unusual was the commandant asks, he's been there for 5 years or something. He asks for them to send him a woman. Doesn't have to be beautiful.
Any woman.
And they send him this incredible person. And he just, is mesmerized by her, even though he's kind of a cold spirit. His nickname is the Beast.
Yes.
And then the woman sees a young man who is a prisoner, and she doesn't say anything immediately, but he calls out another name. He calls out Francis, which of course to us is not the greatest name, but but that's what he says. And that's sort of the beginning of the setup of who is this prisoner? Why is he calling out to her? Why send a beautiful woman to this commandant, the Beast, and on this Strasnoy Island of prisoners? A very interesting setting, in my opinion.
Full of tension and conflict. And it's it's very Ayn Randian in that sense. I think there's conflict all around. And so Jeff, maybe you could jump in with some of the background, but my understanding is, as I said at the beginning, this is the first literary thing she ever sold. And she took a break during the writing of We the Living to do this. Is that correct, Jeff?
Yes. It's interesting to think of her taking a break from the writing of We the Living, because We the Living was being written in, I think, sporadically during this time, because it was really taking a break from her day job at the time, which was in the clerical department of the wardrobe at RKO Pictures, a studio that was employing her and many others at the time. But she was working an incredible amount of time at the lot, on sometimes all day and sometimes for 24-hour stretches during the time that a movie was in production, and wardrobe and apparel, hardware, and wardrobe being the closest prop to the actor, very important thing. But she kept track of all of the wardrobe on the company clock and became known for her filing and her, organization of this important part of the production process. So, writing for her at the time was really a additional creative effort and obligation that she had made to herself, and a commitment which, and for her ease in doing these initial writings, she focused on her Soviet background, and that's what Anne was referring to in the opening about the
write what you know.
Pardon me?
Right? Write what you know.
Right.
That's one of the things they tell you, right?
And she,
And
you know,
so
she
she
was,
knew about Soviet Russia.
right.
was
She was
from there.
working on a novel about, with that as a background, then called Airtight, which later became We the Living. And she also had another story idea that she had developed called Treason, which was also set in a Soviet context. So these were things that were in the air, and she grasped at them, and that's what she was doing.
Can I ask you, Jeff, are you in your archives office right now?
I am.
Yeah. Could you just give us a plug and tell us, what are the Ayn Rand archives? What is?
Well, the Ayn Rand Archives is the largest themed repository of documents in all media by and about Ayn Rand, including those influenced by her. And we also collect the records of institutions that have been influenced by her. It's been in existence since 1995 at the Ayn Rand Institute, a special department of the Ayn Rand Institute. It collects material, papers, digital items, AV, furniture, artwork, anything by and about Ayn Rand's process, development, and biography.
And is this material that we're reading in the early Ayn Rand in the archives in like a typewriter manual? What is it like?
Yeah, it's here's an example of a typed letter of Ayn Rand's. I have a copy of one right here. So yeah, she
old.
Yeah, she the papers have aged. They've gold. They yellow after decades. But yes, the things that we have from the early Ayn Rand are her original typewritten documents for the most part. There's some part of the early Ayn Rand that is from handwritten documents, as I recall. But
wow.
The bulk of the material is typewritten.
You figure what we're reading is typewritten. I did want to add something that Kirk said about that it's dramatic. Ayn Rand is always very dramatic, and that there's a lot of conflict. But as a theater person, so I direct plays, what you want is not only conflict between two characters, you also want internal conflict, right? And each of these main characters, that is the commandant and Joan, who he calls Francis, and Michael, they all have things they want that are in conflict within them, which is a great plus for an actor to play. So Jeff, I think it's time to drop the bomb.
Well, part of this is information that's available to the public, because I'm going to cite one letter in bombing the listeners with this information. But as readers or listeners to this podcast probably know, Ayn Rand wrote 4 novels: Anthem, We the Living in Order, We the Living, Anthem, The Fountainhead, and Atlas Shrugged. And she also wrote a novella called Ideal, which constitutes really 5 large and small novels. Anthem is a novella, so it's technically 2 novellas and 3 long-form novels. Well, guess what? There's another Ayn Rand work, and it's the one that's in the early Ayn Rand, labeled a film treatment for Red Pawn. That's a misidentification. Actually, what sold Red Pawn to Universal Pictures in the early 30s,
1931. Oh, is it 2? Sorry. I thought it was 1931. I thought it was 1931 to Universal, and then a few years later, Universal sold it for a project for like $20,000 to Paramount.
That did occur, yes. And
so Paramount currently owns Red Pawn, as far as I understand, but they own the basic treatment, which means they own the idea and like what she created of these characters. Is that correct?
Right.
And then what you're saying is that this is not the word for word what she sold to them. She sold to them a 13-page treatment.
Right, a 13-page synopsis, which then, by my understanding, through her oral history, she then developed as a longer work that didn't immediately go into production, or was a interim step between the synopsis, the short synopsis, and a full-length script. And you're right, the work was traded for another property of significantly greater value financially than what was originally paid for the treatment of.
But what's the surprise? We're going on.
Well, the surprise is that Red Pawn is actually, in the form that is published in the Early Ayn Rand, is Ayn Rand's second novella. And she
now,
described it as a novella.
Now, yeah, so I think the bomb is not just the classification, it's that's how she thought of it, right? Like she thinks of this, and you have some evidence for us,
right,
from her writings this is only in the archives, right? You have to go to the archives to see this, or is this published anywhere? What you're about to say us?
This, you can actually see this letter in the Letters of Ayn Rand publication, but
okay, the book
goes by so quickly because there's not the mosaic of other evidence that is available in the archives to kind of piece together. Bombs like this are pieced together by little tiny fuses and
she makes a note here.
Things.
She writes a letter to somebody and mentions it in the postscript or something.
Right, and she did on August 20th of 1934. She says, "Dear Miss Wick," who is her agent at the time, "under separate cover, I'm mailing to you a copy of a novelette I have written from my screen story, Red Pawn. If you recall, this is the story which Paramount has bought, and which probably will be Marlene Dietrich's next or second vehicle. Paramount has the screen rights." Yes.
So I did not know that.
Yes.
So you're saying that Marlene Dietrich was going to perform as Joan Harding?
Right. And it was going to be directed by, well, the directing team associated with Marlene Dietrich at the time was, of course, I
don't know this actually.
Sternberg.
Wow.
And
that would have been quite the movie.
Yeah, and she goes on to say, "Paramount has the screen rights, of course, but I have the serial rights, and I have rewritten the story in novelette form, hoping it may be suitable for a serial publication in a magazine."
So can I ask you? Oh, sorry. Yeah, continue. Well, let's get out. Okay. Do you have more, please?
Well, just
Rand is more important than me.
And here she says at the end of this letter, because she says, "I don't want to give you the impression that I can write nothing but Russian stories. My first
that I remember.
Merely because it was the background that I knew best, and because I found in it material that had not been overdone." And what
she brought something new to the story.
Right, but she is also saying, "But I'm working at present on a new novelette with a strictly American background. It is laid in Hollywood and does not have a single Russian in it."
Was that ideal?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So, all right. So this is great. So for one thing, what you read in the in the Early Ayn Rand, and actually real quick, just a couple super chats. Thank you, Mary Aline. Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you, Jerry Egan. And thank you, Jonathan Honig, for your super chat support. Hopefully you all are reading the Early Ayn Rand. And like Jeff is saying, if you get the Early Ayn Rand book, the one that it's in Kindle, it's in paperback that Anne showed earlier, it has a bunch of good stuff, including this novelette, so it's a short novel that is essentially in a very movie style in certain ways. And there's a lot, like you could see the visuals if you have, I know most of us here, or all of us here, have a kind of background in directing or film of some sort, the creative arts. And you can really see this movie play out. I mean, there's some scenes in here where you could absolutely visualize just how incredible all the themes and the conflicts. If you've read We the Living, you kind of know. And just one example I wanted to kind of, tell you guys and get your thoughts on this about the actual story. So we want to tease you with a couple of things about the story, but we really want to do more of the discussion next time. One of the beautiful things about Ayn Rand's novel, I'm going to call it the novella or novelette. Which one do you say, Jeff? You say novelette or novella?
let's use what she described it as, and novelette.
Novelette, okay. Which I think is the anyway. So there's this Strathmore Island was a monastery for monks before the Civil War in Russia, and now it's turned after the communists won in Russia. They took it over and they turned it into a communist prison, essentially, for mostly they threw all the people they didn't want, the engineers and scientists,
the white Russians.
Yeah, exactly. The white Russians that they didn't want anymore. And there's so many great visuals, so much great just novel writing, like prose writing in here.
Yeah, I think, Jeff, I
one.
think I just want to say any reader, I think, can visualize this. I don't think you have to have any special abilities, but I think just reading it, people will see it in their mind's eye. Sorry.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. So there's a scene, a lot of great scenes. One of the scenes is a man trying to paint a red flag on one of the old murals from the monastery. And the library was the creation of Comrade Fedosich, one of the characters, Fedosich. I don't know how to pronounce these. We like to talk of our duty to the new culture. I'm reading the story. The murals did not harmonize with his new culture, and Comrade Fedosich had tried to improve them. He had painted a red flag into the raised hand of Saint Vladimir as that first Christian ruler converted his people to the new faith. He had painted a sickle and hammer on Moses's tablets, but the ancient glazing that protected the murals, its secret lost with the monks, did not take fresh paint well. The red flag ran down the wall and peeled off in pieces. So Comrade Fedosich had given up the idea of artistical, and basically he just hammered like a picture in the end. And I just want to like that visual. What do you think is the importance to the theme of this story, of the visual of that, the saint and, converting people, and then, this new guy, Fedosich, is trying to put this, the hammer and sickle and the red
Well, to be
flag.
honest, Kirk, I find it part of Ayn Rand's wit. I mean, I think this is kind of funny and ironic, and it's like they can't do it right? The paint is dripping down the walls. It's like they don't have the ability to even execute it. But what do you think, Jeff?
Well, all that is good, and all that contributes to the idea that it's what we're reading in the work that's in the Early Ayn Rand is a literary work, not a film synopsis or a summary. Because in a 13-page synopsis, which I glanced through this morning in prep for our discussion today, the only, and people can correct me if I'm wrong, the only reference to monasteries, monks, and the Russian religion comes in the very first paragraph in the second line of the synopsis. And
in the actual synopsis she sold?
Yeah, and there's no other reference to any monks. So that,
that's interesting.
Use of Soviet iconography and Russian religious iconography is, something that was a literary creation for the development of the synopsis. And it may appear in a worked out script if one of them can be found. And I think there is one that exists. We just don't have it. It's probably still at Universal. And it was something that was a provisional step further, presumably, between the synopsis and the shooting script, a shooting script which she was actually hired years later to work on, and went to the studio record, I guess it was Paramount, for 4 weeks in an office waiting for the picture to fire, and it never started happening. So she stood, she basically was at a desk for 8 hours a day for 4 weeks.
Just getting paid, huh?
Just getting paid, yeah.
Yeah.
But
so,
the line in this, I wanted just to say, is that in the second paragraph of the opening of the synopsis, a speck of rocks and snow in the Arctic waters off the Siberian coast, the island had once been the monastery of a fanatical sect that chose as that chose it as the grimmest proof of renouncing the world.
So I think that what's really good is the introduction that Peikoff is talking about in the early Ayn Rand when he's referring to Red Pawn. He's more talking about the 13-page synopsis she sold. What's here in the story is this fully fledged out. I mean, it's not completely Ayn Rand approved. She didn't do all the editing, I know, that she normally does, as far as I understand it. But it is a full story with the beginning, middle, and end. It's a very interesting prose novel. You're not just reading a synopsis in the early Ayn Rand. It's a whole like, and it's a beautiful story with lots of her beautiful prose that she, like, there's a scene, I won't read it, but there's a scene of Joan Harding bringing a radio to all these prisoners, a broken down radio, and she kind of kneels playing around with it while you have this whole description of this whole world of a chess player over here, and this guy built, an old general, like one of these great generals from the Russian, pre-Russian Revolution. He's making little toys, and she's trying, and it's like this dreary life. And then all of a sudden there's like this explosion of jazz music, and it's the way she describes it is just very beautiful. And so I think, again, guys, read this story, and we'll talk about it more in depth next time, but we really want to encourage. Anne, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say, I know she was a fan of Marlene Dietrich, and that's so interesting that, I mean, the person that I kept thinking of was Garbo, partly because we had just talked about her recently, but I tried to think about contemporary actors, of which we have some wonderful women, but I could not come up with a Joan today. So I wanted to have you guys think about it. Maybe when we meet again, we can talk further about it. But I really thought, I don't know if we have anybody of that mystery, because that's part of what those women had, right? Was there was so much going on underneath.
Yeah. I think that's something that is hard for us as movie viewers today to understand what a woman like Garbo or Dietrich brought in the past, right? And if you watch old movies, you can kind of see there's always more going on than you can see,
right?
And I think that and maybe there is someone, Anya Taylor. What's her name? She might, I don't know who could play Joan. That'd be interesting. Who could play? I think we could probably find some people for the Beast, and maybe even Michael. I think that would be, I do agree, Joan would be the hardest person to cast. And what do you think? Do you think it's just the mystery that's going on with Joan, Anne and Jeff?
Well, I mean, I think Jeff was going to say something else before. Were you just going to say something, Jeff?
Well, I think I believe there are a lot of there are mounds of talent out there, just gobs of talent. But it's talent that's lying fallow, waiting for the right kind of writer who understands dramatic structure and plot to appear, to, create a story, a narrative that is going to use all these wonderful resources that are available in motion pictures and TV. And that's the missing link in this. Not so much the mystery of the talent. I mean, in a way, the von Sternberg and Dietrich were a directing acting duo, and he selected parts for her in movies that were very atmospheric in Ayn Rand's view, and led to his demise as a director. They were not congealed with plot significance or by plot significance, and the values that Dietrich could bring as a mysterious figure simply, didn't have a chance to materialize on screen. And in fact, because Dietrich had just recently appeared in The Scarlet Empress, which was a Russian story about Catherine the Great, he declined Red Pawn because it was, for superficial reasons in Ayn Rand's view, because it was, this Russian background. And,
well, may I say to our audience that, I don't know, I feel like maybe somebody wrote this, but that term Red Pawn is ambiguous and ironic as you read the whole piece. So it's interesting. I don't want to get into it until we get to the end, but
Right.
who is the red pawn is kind of fun, and that's so Ayn Rand.
Right, and that's I mean, the strength of the story could be distilled into a few lines in the great wisdom of DeMille, her writing mentor in some respects. You've got to distill a situation into a single statement, which gives you the skeleton of the conflict, out of which you can build, as far as you wish, a narrative, depending on where you want to go with it. So
yeah, I have to admit, I know that there are some objectivist scholars who disagree with this, but I think this could be a stage play. I don't think that it's limited to having to be a movie.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, this could be done, especially today, right? Like this, I think this would be harder to do as a movie today, given viewer expectations. Just because it takes place in one little area. Like I could see this as an art film, art house film type thing.
But think of the movie Portrait of a Woman on Fire. It all takes place in an island in Guernsey. So like I could see this as an art house film, sure, as like a little art house film. I don't see it as like a major because of there's no explosions, dude. There's no like murders and killing and like it's just like it's too slow, and I love it. I mean, I think it's a wonderful tense story, but I'm just anyway. Maybe people listening can disagree, but if you're trying to sell this to a modern audience, it'd be very difficult because you gotta like understand the tension. One of the, we'll wrap up here, but the basic subplot or the basic plot is one that Ayn Rand used in We the Living, and it's one is her twist on a cliche story, which is the woman who loves one man, and she and that man is, I don't know how it is under the power of another man, and she sleeps with the man who has the power in order to free the other man. This story is told in like operas, and it's a cliche idea for years, hundreds of years or whatever. But what Ayn Rand does is she makes the guy who has the power a heroic man worthy of admiration. Mm-hmm. And this is something very unique. So she has this view that evil is impotent. So she could never make an antagonist a really powerful man because she doesn't believe that's possible, right? And it's always the good versus the good. And that's what makes the tension so interesting, I think, is that Joan has a real problem on her hands when she starts to like this beast guy, and she's there for her husband. That's why she's there. And yeah, I'm revealing something, but that something is revealed pretty early on in the story. Right. But that's the essential conflict: is this woman is here on this island to save her husband, Michael, and she is sleeping with the commandant. That's why she's a whore, essentially sent from the higher up. So any final thoughts on the actual story? And
well, I really think it's powerful. I mean, I'm a huge fan of We the Living, and if you've not read We the Living, it's a tremendous experience. And if you have read We the Living, this is a wonderful follow-up.
I agree
too.
Cool. Well, we'll be back in a month or so.
I think mid December. We'll put it up there. I think it's something mid to late December. Just one last thing. Thank you, Bonnie, for the super chat, and Marilyn. And Bonnie said, "Didn't Jeff write the music to A Sense of Life?" And he was the composer. So yes, we have the composer of A Sense of Life. And Marilyn recommends possibly Cate Blanchett to play Joan. So I think Cate Blanchett might be a little too old now, but maybe we could gussy her up to be a 20-year-old. I mean, Joan is like 20s, early 20s.
I do think Joan's in her 20s, yeah.
Ayn Rand said this, wanted to give the part of Dagny to Barbara Stanwyck in the late 50s. And the comment at the time this was brought up in a conversation is, oh, she's too old. And Ayn Rand said, oh, there are things you can do with lenses.
Well, Howard Rourke is, in the movie, he's too old, right? He's a little old for Gary Cooper's a bit old at that point to play Howard Rourke throughout his whole time. Anyway,
Gary Cooper's not good enough to play Howard Rourke. That's the problem.
That's the other problem. Yeah, I think he didn't live up to
age
it.
is not the problem. Well, thank you so much, Kirk, for putting this together, and I look forward to returning. And thank you, fans. We're not going to do Clubhouse today.
Oh, too bad.
We'll do it the next time. Look at Jeff.
Yeah. So read Red Pond. Go read that novelette by Ayn Rand.
Oh, and one thing I want to say is that with all archival love, committing to anything on paper when you dig out of mounds of stuff and set up something is so beautifully done by Dr. Peikoff in the Early Ayn Rand. And what I bring to this is just a Johnny come lately add on to something, because I've spent a little more time with the material perhaps, but he did such a wonderful door opening job of presenting the Early Ayn Rand to the world. And it introduced me to Ideal, which has been a lifelong passion of mine. Thank you.
All right.